Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name's Stephen. I'm a traditionally published fantasy author. Today I'm going to be talking through some more of the realities of being traditional published, what it means, and touch on some of the points. Now, some of these I've talked about a little bit in previous videos if you're a long-time viewer. If you are not and you're brand new, then this will be new information to you, but I'm going to expand on some other things that I've touched on in the past, so there'll still be new information for you. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is to do with a recent post that someone did on Twitter. They post a question about traditional publishing and they had over 100 responses from different people, both those who have no experience of traditional publishing and many traditionally published authors. And the responses were very interesting because it showed lack of information that's actually accurate from people who have no idea what being traditionally published means, despite the tons of information that is out there. And my old channel, I'd like to believe to some degree, people are still getting it horribly wrong. So we're going to talk about that today. The first thing we're talking about is to do with rejection. And I saw someone talking about this on their channels, just a small channel, so it's not something I'm going to go after or anything. But they were saying that they don't want to be traditionally published because they don't like getting rejected. They don't want to do it, so they're going to go and be self-published instead. Now, as I've always said in other videos, they're very different paths. No one is better than the other. I'm not biased. I'm not saying you have to be traditionally published or you should absolutely, all costs do it and it's much better than self-publishing. They're very, very different avenues. They have different strengths and weaknesses. I've done videos about that too. Go and check them out. Now, I understand that being rejected is tough. I've had this myself. It took me over 10 years and many, many books of being rejected by an agent before I was eventually picked up by my agent, and then we went forward. And as I've done a video in the past, which I'll link to here, you can have an agent and still not have a book deal for several years. It could be that your first book, your second book, for whatever reason, when it goes out to the market, it doesn't work. So even though you have an agent in your corner who's championing you and loves your work, it's not right. So let's talk on some of the reasons you could be rejected. Let's talk about for some of the less obvious reasons about why you might be rejected by an agent. So the first one is to do with personal taste. Let's say you've written a horror novel or some sort of crime novel that's very, very graphic. It's still fiction, it's still within the remit of that agent. But when they read it, they just can't get behind it, they don't like it, there's something that makes them uncomfortable, and it comes down to personal taste, and they've sort of said, I like it, but it's not for me. Agent B looks at it and says, brilliant, this is exactly what I like, I really think, I can champion this, there's nothing that makes me uncomfortable, I'm willing to go forward with it. It doesn't mean the first agent's wrong, it means that they're not the right person for it. And I know that's annoying because if they think the book is good and they can sell it, then shouldn't they just do it anyway? But not if they don't believe in it, not if they're completely behind it. They won't. Maybe there are some agents that just have no scruples whatsoever. If they think something's commercial and if it makes them uncomfortable and they don't care, they'll just take it on. Now, obviously, I've touched on a very, very ordinary kind of thing there by saying a book with graphic violence or something like that. But there are some controversial books that come out that some agents just won't touch. They just morally they can't cope with it. They don't want to profit off something that's kind of gross or weird or is putting out awful messages. But then again, those books have come out, so some agents have gone, yeah, that's fine, I've got no issue with it whatsoever. So I think I'd rather have an agent with scruples, to be honest, but maybe that's just me. The other thing to think about is that the agent pool is not infinite. There are not thousands and thousands of agents, particularly for your genre and for your type of book. But equally, there's not a small number now. It's grown from what it used to be. It used to be that there was only a handful of agents, so looking after, say, fantasy, it could be that there were half a dozen or a dozen agencies, and out of that agency you might get one of many agents that would look after fantasy. It has changed now. There are more than you think, but it's still quite a small pool, relatively speaking. So getting an agent is tough. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but personal taste can be one of the deciding factors that isn't always obvious. The next issue might be to do with timing. Now, this is something we don't really know there again, because when the books are coming out in the market today, they've been written 1, 2, 3 years ago. They've then been through an editorial process for anywhere from 6 months to 12 months. Then there's all the build-up and marketing and promotion to get it ready for the launch date. So if there's, a huge splurge of, I don't know, vampire books, let's just say that, and you think, right, actually I've got one now and it's ready. If I send it to the agent now, she's going to love it, surely, because now it's very popular. The problem is, even if they love it, the timing could be way off. It could be that the market is actually currently saturated, and that even though you're sending it now to an agent, she's already got 6 books that are already in with editors and that are far along the editorial process and that will be coming out in the next 6 to 12 months. And if half a dozen agents have done that and they've all got 6 books in, so there's suddenly going to be 35 vampire books coming out within the next, year, 2 years. Do they really want another one a year, 2 years after that? It could be that, they just kind of say there's too many at the moment, which leads to the next thing, which is to do with another reason, which is not today. It could be that agents get a book, they love it, they take it on, and when they go to the editors have said to them, right, we don't want to see any more of X, Y, and Z because we've got a list of books for the next 12 to 24 months. We know what we're publishing, we know we need to have sort of a good spread, we need to have them spread out so they don't kind of cannibalize off each other's sales too closely. So therefore we don't want any more space operas or vampire books or whatever it might be. That's something that we don't know as someone sat at home writing your books. There's no way to know behind the scenes what the agents have heard and what they know and what they've been told by the publishers. This is something that's kind of behind the curtain that you only find out once you get into the process, once you start talking to your agent. Like, this is going back a couple of years ago. I had an idea for a book and I was rattling it around in my head. I was currently on contract for something else, and I went to my agent and said, I'm thinking about writing a book like this. And she said, how far are you into the project? I said, very, very early stages. And she told me, don't do it, because right now is not a good time. She said the market is saturated at this point. The advances for this kind of thing are very low because there's so many of them. So even if the publisher thought, okay, we'll take it on, it would be very low advance because they want to minimize their risk. So I didn't do anything with it. I put it on a shelf. It might be in 5 years' time or 2 years' time, I go to my agent and say, what's happening in the market now? Is it the right time for this kind of book? And she might say yes. But you don't know that until you've got someone in your corner, and you can't ever find that out really unless you go to some events and you're able to question agents and editors and ask them this kind of question, which is why conventions and getting to know your genre that you're writing in is so important. So that's some of the less obvious reasons about why your book might be rejected. But let's get on to some of the obvious stuffs. Now, I hate to be the one to break this to you, but it's something you need to take in and it's something you need to take on board properly and accept. And I'm sure there'll be some dislike buttons because people don't want to face reality. But not everything you write is going to be good. Your first book probably isn't going to be that great at all. And yes, there's always going to be someone who'll say, oh, but I read about so-and-so's debut book that was picked up and it was the first book they've ever written and they got a contract, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that happens. However, doesn't mean that happens to everybody. It happens to a very small number. Some people are really good writers from the beginning. They have an innate talent, they have an innate skill, and when they start writing, it just works, it just clicks. I've seen it for myself. But I wasn't one of those people. It took me over a decade of writing books, and the first one, if I went back and looked at it now, I'd be ashamed, I'd be embarrassed that I was sending this out. But in my mind, I thought it was good. The truth is, it was as good as I could make it at the time, but my skill level wasn't there. And yours might not be, and you have to accept that. You have to learn from that book. And I say, oh, it's wasted effort and blah, 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 and I put this time in, and what am I supposed to do with nothing? Just leave it alone. If you think the knee-jerk reaction is being rejected, therefore they don't know what they're talking about, therefore I'm going to self-publish and prove them right, then you haven't learned anything at all. You're not willing to take any kind of criticism, and when you attempt to work with an editor, even if you're self-published, and they give you feedback and you ignore it, you're the dickhead in the room. This is the reality. So when you write this book, give it to friends and family, join a writing group, whatever, and they give you feedback, and if they tell you it's not very good and it needs work, you need to listen. You need to buck up, you need to work hard, and you need to do another book. Take that one as far as you can, learn everything you can from it, and then start a new book. Take on board all the advice that people have given you. Not every piece of advice is going to be useful, but filter it through, absorb it, take a breather, wallow a bit in that rejection, whatever it might be, but then you pick yourself up and you write another book. And if you can't face that, if you don't want to do that, then maybe writing isn't for you, because it is a tough game, whether you're self-published or traditionally published. And here's the other thing. I hate to point this out, but some people really need to hear it because they just haven't got the message. Just because you've finished a book, that doesn't entitle you to be published. Now, I know there are thousands of people, when you tell them you're a writer, their first comment is, oh, I'm going to write a book, as if somehow the art of finishing a book will make it brilliant and therefore fantastic piece of fiction and therefore everyone will love it. That isn't true, and neither is it for you. You know that person when they say that. They're probably never going to do it ever. And even if they do, it's probably going to be crap, but you need to take that on board yourself. Finishing a book doesn't entitle you to a book deal. If, when you send your book out to an agent and they give you some feedback of any kind, take it on board as much as you can. Now, a lot of agents don't. They don't give any feedback. They give form replies because they just don't have time. But if you do get any kind of pointers, listen to them. Then some people have said, do I need to hire a freelance editor before I submit my book to an agent? That's a purely personal thing. If you think you're missing some of the basics, you don't have the skill, you don't have the friends and family or the people with enough talent or enough knowledge around you to help polish the book up and get it to a certain level, then I would consider hiring an editor. However, of course, that also comes with a cost. So you have to factor that in. You have to factor the idea of, can you write a book and learn from it yourself? Or do you need to work with someone else who can give you pointers and say, this isn't working, you should do this, you should do that. And then you learn from that person's knowledge and take that forward into your next book so that you don't repeat the same mistakes twice. Sometimes that's necessary. I didn't do it, other people I know have. So that's completely down to you and your personal choice and of course your personal financial situation. So what is your goal as a writer? Is it to sell a handful of copies or is it to become a full-time writer? And also, if you do decide to go down the self-publishing route, I also hate to point this out because it should be obvious as well, you're still going to get a form of rejection from readers, from reviews, because they're going to say whatever they want and you can't do anything about it. If you go and choose to read those reviews, which I wouldn't advise that you do, you can't argue with them. You can't go onto any kind of website or forum and tell them they're wrong. If their opinion is, I don't like this book, it wasn't very good, there's nothing you can say about that. There's nothing you can do. Even if factually they put something wrong in a review, you can't really do anything about that either. What are you going to do? Go and argue with them online? Do you know how weird that looks? How crazy? How kind of stalkerish and peculiar that would make you? Nobody does that. And if you do, you basically create the wrong kind of buzz about your book. So rejection in some form as a writer is going to happen, whether it's from agents, editors, readers, and reviewers and bloggers and booktubers. There are some people that hate the most popular books. Doesn't mean they're wrong. It means in their opinion it's not a good fit for them with their tastes. And you can't do anything about that too. So some kind of rejection as a writer is totally par for the course. Another reason someone said they didn't want to be a traditional published author was to do with deadlines. They said deadlines give them anxiety and they just can't cope with it. Well, if you're self-publishing too, you're going to have deadlines. You can write books much faster. You can put them out much faster. But there again, building a career as a self-published author means putting out a book, getting some feedback, starting to build your audience, and then putting out another book and building on the first one, and then another one, and another one. And if you put a self-published book out every 3 years, 5 years, I don't really think that's sustainable either as a career. But there again, it depends what you want to do. If you just want to write a book, put it out, get some feedback, get a little bit of money, and you live your life doing something else with a totally different day job, and use that to fund your self-publishing, then great. But if the goal is to be full-time self-published author, you have to put books out fairly regular so that people don't forget you, because there's so many books out there every week coming out, every day published in some places. So it's about momentum. So you don't like deadlines? Well, you're going to have them as well too. Now we get to the question that someone posed on Twitter, which showed a huge divide from what people actually know about traditional publishing and the realities. And the question that someone posed was, if a publisher offers to publish your novel, but you have to wait 2 years and they need you to cut 10,000 words, would you take the deal? And a lot of people said no. Some of the responses showed such ignorance. It was astonishing. It was absolutely astonishing. One person said, No, why does it doesn't make any sense. If they can't publish my novel now, then why not? Also, what guarantees do I have they'll publish the book? Usually a publisher, you sign over the copyright. No, you don't. That's completely wrong. The copyright of every book written by the author belongs to the author. Let's do a bit of Jackanory, shall we? A bit of story time. Let's have a look. Here's a book. Look, me. It's got my name on it. Published by Angry Robots. My book. And in the front, what does it say? Copyright, Stephen Aryan. Shall I get another one? Shall we do it again? You don't sign over the copyright. You don't. The copyright of the book belongs to the author. I'll come back to the timing thing. The next thing they said was, the 10,000 words. And some people are saying, no, that's ridiculous. Most of the time, I'm going to say 99% of the time, for a standard fiction book, I'm not talking about middle grade, which are quite short books, or children's books, which are also very short. We're talking about a standard work of fiction, science fiction, fantasy, thriller, whatever it might be, the stuff that you find in your supermarket, in a bookstore, those kind of general fiction novels. 10,000 words is nothing. It's absolutely nothing. I've been asked to cut 20k from my books, and then during the editing process, with feedback from my editor, I've ended up adding 10, 12, 14k on top. But it meant that what was there originally wasn't working for whatever reasons. Pace, or certain things weren't working, or certain storylines weren't clicking, and we stripped them out. But in making the book better, we ended up adding stuff in. But 10,000 words is nothing. That's absolutely nothing. And that's a minor edit at the very least. But here are some of the responses from very interesting people, idiots. They said, no way, if they want to cut 10,000 words, they can write it themselves. Okay, next person said, no, absolutely not. One person spoke about other factors to consider, which is fair. They were saying things like, what's the advice from the agent? What about the advance? It's relevant up to a point, but also the fact that if you've worked with your agent and they've said now it's ready, and then they go to the editor and the editor wants you to cut 10,000 words, and your editor is, in that role for a reason, and when you talk to your agent, they say, yes, that's absolutely fine, 10,000 words is very nothing. You should absolutely listen to both of them and do it and take the 10,000 words out. It's there to make your book better. I don't really understand what people trying to get at by the fact that they think 10,000 words is, an arbitrary number. It is. It's a small number. It's a small amount of words. But equally, it's not rewriting the novel. It's editing the novel. Do you not understand what that word means? Lots and lots and lots of traditionally published authors came onto this thread and said, that is absolutely normal. That is absolutely standard. I don't see any issue with that whatsoever. That's normal. If you can't cope with that, or you think there's something wrong with it, you have no idea about the business, because it is a business. So let's talk about the 2-year kind of timeline. Let's say you take your book to an agent on the 1st of January. They read it in a day. It wouldn't happen. And they come back to you on that very first day and say, brilliant, it doesn't need any work at all. I'm going to take it to an editor now. And then you hear from an editor on the 1st of March, so within 2 months. There again, not likely to happen. But they say, right, on the 1st of March, the editor says, I love this book, we'll take it on, you sign the contract in a day. Doesn't happen again. Right, and then they say, right, we're going to put your book out next year. It could be any time from March the following year, 12 months on, up to any time that year, August, September, October. So it could be 12, 14, 16, 18 months on. And here, one of the many, many reasons why. To put a book through the process, the editorial process of traditional publishing, is a lot slower because it's a much larger machine. They also plan their books out 12 to 24 months ahead. As I spoke about earlier, say you've written a vampire book and they're putting one out next year in January, and they say, right, yours is good, but if we release it too close to the other book, I talked about this earlier when I said about cannibalizing sales, if their book comes out in January, they're not going to put your book out within 3, 4, 5, maybe in 6 months, so that there's enough sales and awareness generated from that first book. It has a peak, it does really, really well, and after a while, sales will then trail off. That's kind of normal. But then they start doing PR and awareness and stuff for your book, and it builds up, and then it launches and events and all this kind of stuff, and you get a peak of sales. But if you put them too close to the other one, it's not going to work and it's not good for either of you. But then, later on the two of you could then do a panel about vampire books, and you've got someone in common and you've got a kind of buddy on the circuit for this kind of thing. But you wouldn't want that person to have a book out on the same day as you or too close to you. So that's why it can take longer than you might expect, because publishers have lists of books that they're working on now and in the near future. So publishers are not just working on one book at a time, they're working on a whole raft of books, some that are really far down the editorial process and are about ready to come out. There are some that are halfway through, they're in deep edit, there are some that are working on the cover design, and then there are brand new ones that they're taking on. And all the time they're kind of juggling and shuffling all these different books, and there are only a certain number of resources, a certain number of people, a certain number of cover designers, editors, proofreaders, all these kind of things. So they do one, move it on, do the next one, and so on, which is why it just takes longer, because even though they're large businesses compared to, say, some self-published people, they don't have infinite resources and infinite money. They just don't. It's a lot of kind of business and a lot of expectations and planning and hope that a book will do well, but not every book does, and so they have to factor that into their finances and things. So it's a real gamble in some ways. They work on a book as hard as they can, they want it to be brilliant, they put it out, and sometimes it just doesn't work, and they don't know why. The market doesn't accept it. There's a saturation, there's a weird feel, there's a PR disaster, there could be something happens in the world, some kind of major event, like one we've had in the last couple of years, that totally changes publishing for 12 months. Just stuff you can't anticipate. But what this thread showed me is that there are an enormous number of people out there who are going into the self-publishing route and rejecting traditional publishing because they have tons of misinformation and they don't actually understand how it works. They don't know about editorial, they don't know about the timelines and the realities, and they have these myths that have been given to them by people online, probably. So if you don't know and you're uncomfortable about something to do with traditional publishing, but you're also not sure if it's real, ask one of us, talk to us on social media. We're very friendly. As I said, conventions are a great place. Go to the panels, go to these talks, go to book signings and ask editors, agents, authors about something. And we're happy to share this information with you. So if you don't know, please ask. If you have any questions for me about any of this, leave a comment below and I will answer it. Every month I do a Q&A talking about stuff that people have asked me on this channel to do with publishing, editing, getting an agent, whatever it might be. So if you don't know, ask me, ask someone else. I've been through the process many times. I will try and find the answer for you if I don't know it. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about today. I'll be back next week with another video.